Hey guys, in this video we're gonna take a look at, in my opinion, the most spectacular game played so far in the Tata Steel Masters in Wijk am See, the first super tournament of the year 2016. I'm talking about a game between David Navara and Giri. Here we have the players. No, that's not really them. David Navara with the white pieces is the Czech #1 and he's facing Giri, who wants to become the chess #1. Currently he is rated 2798 and very close, always around the #2 spot in the world. Had a very good Grand Chess Tour in 2016. In front of his home crowd in Holland, he wants to do well. Started badly into the tournament though, lost in the first round against Wesley So, and is facing David Navara in this game with the black pieces. Navara, a very principled player, never shies away from sharp lines, plays both d4 and e4. And for this game, he's decided to test Giri in the Grünfeld. One of many openings Giri is fluent in, even though he can play pretty much anything. Queen b3 is the subject of discussion. I believe they call it the Russian variation. White brings out the queen early. The point is he doesn't want to allow, after cd5, knight d5, e4, the exchange of these knights, which is the other Grünfeld mainline. But instead, he wants to maintain his center perfect and keep this knight here. The price he pays for it is he develops his queen a little earlier than we're accustomed to. This is a position that has been played in thousands of games. Black has 3 main lines, or maybe even 4. Knight a6 intending c5, knight c6 intending either e5 or bishop to g4, the immediate bishop g4, or the move played in the game, the most popular at Super Grandmaster level, the move a6. Might look strange, black wants to go b5 and then play c5, open the center before white is fully developed. Bishop e2 is the most trendy move these days. There is alternatives. I used to play a lot of e5 here with very, very sharp play. Stuff like this, knight ft7, h4, or bishop e3, or e6, but black has been doing alright here. Check out Peter Svidler's video series on the Grünfeld on Chess24 if you would like to know more. Bishop e2, the main move, b5, queen to b3, and c5. This is the point of black's play. If black played the more natural looking bishop b7, he would be in some trouble positionally after e5. c5 is what they do, no surprise yet, a temporary pawn sacrifice. Black tends to get either this pawn or this pawn back, but he still has to do it after dc5. And here the first minor surprise for me is that Giri chooses the move bishop b7. Still nothing new, this has been played a lot, but according to my knowledge, bishop e6 is supposed to be the main line, and the critical test here nowadays, queen to c2, knight bd7, a line championed by Peter Svidler, counterattacking against the c5 pawn, has a huge body of theory and has been played by Giri, amongst other things, on the white side against Alexander Grishuk, so this is a well-known line to him. Instead he goes for bishop b7, which is also considered okay, but has a slightly more shady reputation as far as I know. They used to just castle here when after knight takes e4, knight takes e4, bishop takes e4. Black tends to be doing alright, some classic games here, Kasparov, Leko, for example, I believe, no big problems. But the latest wrinkle is that white goes e5. Logically enough, the pawn is under attack, so it advances. And after knight ft7, turns out white can't defend both his pawns, but he goes for the move bishop e3. He's decided the c5 pawn is more important to keep. And should black play the natural move, knight takes e5, after knight takes e5, bishop takes e5, rook to d1, white can put a bit of pressure on the black position. This is by no means losing and has also been featured in Grandmaster games, but it's a little unpleasant. For example, queen c7, knight to d5, takes, knight to c6, and white keeps attacking things, goes bishop f3, forcing black to play rook ac8, when after queen c6, takes, all of a sudden we have an endgame where white is a little bit better because of his passed pawn on c5. As I said, by no means losing, but it's a little unpleasant to play with black. Therefore, black players have started looking for alternatives, and what they've come up with is not to take any pawn very quickly, but first to play e6, taking control of the d5 square, stopping white from going e6 himself, and then he wants to continue developing with queen c7, knight c6 if needed, and only then recapture one of the pawns. All of this has been played before. Most notably recently in a game between Boris Gelfand and Grunfeld guru Peter Svidler, where Peter Svidler got into some trouble. Gelfand played the move we also see in the game, Rook a to d1, occupying the d file with the rook, not bothering to defend either pawn. Black took on c5. If Black were to take on e5 instead, once again he could end up in some hot waters because this pawn is stronger than its colleague on e5. And here after f4, let's say the bishop goes back, white goes a4. There's plenty of stuff left for a theoretical discussion, but I slightly prefer white's chances. Therefore, Black goes after the tastier pawn with knight takes c5 when structurally he's doing very, very well. If he wasn't bothered and managed to get his other knight out without permanent damage, e5 could be a weakness. This bishop would be good, everything would be nice, but he's a little behind in development, and that's what white is trying to use by playing queen to a3. The Svidler game continued with the slightly strange move knight cd7 here, and it didn't end well for Svidler. After queen e7 he ended up in trouble very quickly because he couldn't finish his development very normally. He lost to Boris Gelfand. Obvious alternative, or what looks like an obvious alternative, is the move knight bd7, when it seems like Black is fine, but it turns out that after rook to c1, sneaky little switch to the c file, there's still problems. The threat b4 is very unpleasant to meet, and Black can't really manage to coordinate his pieces the way he would like to. Of course, Anish Giri, one of the best theoreticians in the world, knows all this stuff, and he therefore played a move that so far has only been featured in one correspondence game, and that was unknown to his opponent David Navara. The move knight e4 tries to exchange his knight before it causes any trouble. Knight takes e4, bishop takes e4, and Black is still doing pretty well structurally, but he's still lagging behind in development, and white has to try to generate an initiative before Black catches up. First move is a good start, the move knight to g5, attacking the bishop and preparing to go f4 to bolster the outpost on e5. Bishop to c6, f4, and only here is Giri's novelty compared to the correspondence game I mentioned earlier. In that game h6 was played, forcing the knight back, knight to f3, rook c8, bishop d5 also a move, and Black managed to equalize with some careful defense. Giri went queen b7. He mentioned that option h6, but he was trying to get this knight to retreat voluntarily when he would be a tempo up and he wouldn't have weakened his kingside by playing h6, so it's an ambitious move. And if white were indeed to play knight f3 or bishop f3, Black would solve all his problems because he has a good structure after takes. Knight takes, let's say, any move really, knight to c6, Black has absolutely no problems. But Navara, he's a very gifted tactician, and he senses the moment here that Black is still underdeveloped and it's time for action, and he goes for it with the move bishop to c5. Attacking the rook, the first point is, if the rook were to go to its preferred square, or its best square, on c8, white has some nasty tactics, starting with a queen switch across the board, queen h3, targeting this guy, h6, and knight takes e6 when the black position, I believe, collapses. It looks horribly dangerous. Fe, queen e6, king h8, or king h7, doesn't really matter. King h8, queen g6, and if king h7, f5 just looks like it's crushing through. That's why the rook cannot go to c8 as much as it would like to, and has to go to a more passive square on e8. Still, things wouldn't be so bad if black was given a bit of time to develop with knight d7 or with h6 chasing this knight away, and on e8, of course, the rook covers the pawn on e6, therefore queen h3 no longer very powerful. But here Navara, who was out of book, comes up with an amazing combination. That's the main reason I'm showing you this game. He feels he has to do something before black develops, so what do? You open the position at all costs, and that's what he does. He goes for the move f5. When black only has one good move. If g takes f5, you don't need to be a super grandmaster to spot that bishop h5, followed by bishop f7 is trouble. Therefore, what black has to do is to go e takes f5. You can't allow fe6 either, with the rook potentially landing here. So e takes f5 is forced, and now we see the point of f5. Navara is not afraid to invest a whole rook to blow the position open before black develops. He goes rook takes f5. Unfortunately for black, this rook sacrifice has to be accepted. If he were to play bishop d5, for example, to cover his f7 pawn, white would just quietly go bishop f3, exchanges one good defender, bishop takes, rook takes, and disaster is impending on f7. There's nothing you can do about it. So the gift has to be accepted, g takes f5 has to be played. And here white has not one, but two tempting options, and more credit to Navara, he chooses the right one. The alternative, and also very tempting, was the move queen to h3, threatening checkmate here. You have to go h6. Queen takes f5, threatening checkmate. Once again, h takes g5. Black is a rook and a knight up, but bishop d3 once again threatens checkmate. And at first sight, it looks like this can't be stopped. It can be stopped, however. Black has the move rook to e7, blocking the way of this bishop, the side of this bishop. And he stays in the game. Even though even this is not the end of story here. After e6, if you want to spend a couple hours analyzing a crazy sharp position, do your thing. The computer, I believe, gives equality after long thought here. But there is an alternative, as mentioned, and that's the one Navara chooses. He goes for bishop to h5. The very unsubtle intention to take on f7, followed by queen h3 and checkmating the poor black king. Very hard for black to defend here. One move that comes to mind that rightly wasn't played would be rook f8, just willing to return some material to exchange some attackers. But after rook f8, white has more scary tactics. Bishop takes f7, check. Rook takes f7 forced. Rook d8 check. Rook f8 forced. Queen b3 check. Bishop d5 forced. Rook takes d5. Obviously, this is a computer line, but it all works. Or that's why it all works. King h8, bishop takes f8, bishop takes f8. Still looks like black has a lot of material up, but rook d8 collects most of it back with interest. And black cannot survive this position. Or cannot survive is strong, but he's worse. One last trick. Knight to c6. Looks like black is winning. He's managed to defend his bishop. But queen to f7. Threatening checkmate. Not threatening the queen, but if this queen were to go somewhere, h7 would be a problem. And after queen f7, this is forced takes, king g7. Rook takes a8, and white has a better ending. Not sure if the players calculated this or how relevant this line even is, but I thought it was cute enough to include. So bishop h5 asks some very serious questions, and Giri comes up with the correct decision, which is to go bishop d5, protect this pawn with the bishop. But what bishop d5 really means is that he has to sacrifice his queen, because bishop d5 is met with rook takes d5, queen takes d5, bishop takes f7, queen takes f7, knight takes f7, and king takes f7. Now it's time to take stock. A lot of pieces have disappeared. On paper, materially, black is doing very well. He has two rooks and a knight for the queen, which is a big material disadvantage. But he still has the problem that he hasn't managed to develop his queen side. And he has the problem that his king is quite exposed. And there's a couple different ways to use that for Navara. And I believe Navara once again chooses the best one. The most obvious move that comes to mind first would be queen to f3, attacking this rook. When black has to go knight to d7, only move queen takes f5 check, king to g8. Queen takes d7, winning a knight back, but this position, I believe, black should be more or less equal without serious problems. He goes rook d8, then he recaptures a pawn on e5, and with the two active rooks, there will be enough counterplay. We're going to see much later in the game that white will get a much better version of this. Navara cunningly starts with queen b3 check. His point being that if black blocks this check with rook e6, then queen f3 gains in strength tremendously, attacking this rook, and knight d7 no longer works because after queen takes f5, the king can't move because this rook would be en prise as well. This would be winning for white. Therefore, the king has to continue his adventure, go to g6, queen g3 check, king back to f7, and once again, white has a pretty tempting choice here. between the move bishop d4, not played in the game, threatening e6. This is a very inhuman move, but it's surprisingly effective as well. Black has nothing better here, trust me on this, or trust my computer, I didn't calculate a lot. Then going knight c6, returning a piece, e6, king takes e6, bishop takes g7. When the computer gives white a serious advantage, I'm not that sold. White is probably better because his king is so exposed, but he does have two rooks for the queen, and there's no immediate trouble after either rook e7 or rook a8. I believe black should be able to defend here, and I believe what Navara chose is more challenging. He first repeated moves once to avoid time trouble, and now he continued to play queen to f3 in this situation. After knight to d7, he decided not to take on f5, which would transpose to the line I've shown you earlier, but he played a more dangerous move, queen d5 check. The point is that now the black king has to once again search forward. You can't go rook e6 as usual because of queen takes a8, but you have to go king to g6, and once again, you should, not once again, here you should not take on d7. This would lead to a similar position than the one we've seen after bishop takes e5. I don't think you can really use the fact that this king is a little exposed, and after rook a d8, black should get enough counterplay to hold the balance. But the point of Navara's play is another check, queen c6 check, fishing for the best version. If king f7, now you can take this knight with check, or even throw an e6 check, even stronger, winning. Therefore, black faces a very awkward choice. He can't go forward with the king, then queen takes d7 is so strong. So he has to use one of his pieces to block this check. Giri decides to use the knight, which to my mind, to a human, is the most natural way because you want to keep this bishop to cover your king. The computer says you should go bishop to f6 instead. But once you spot the very nasty reply bishop d4, I believe you give up on this idea. Bishop d4, the point is knight e5 runs into bishop e5, and black cannot take, since queen takes a8 leads to a material advantage, and therefore bishop d4 looks very, very unpleasant to me. The computer somehow defends with rook a d8, e takes f6, and knight to e5, but this is beyond human capacities, in my opinion. Giri plays a more natural move, knight to f6, keeping some more defenders around his king, e takes f6, and rook c8 intermediate move, because if he started with bishop takes f6, he would run into yet another little tactic, bishop to e7. Attacking this guy, not allowing rook f8, and if rook e7, queen a8, white should be technically winning here. Therefore, rook c8 had to be thrown in, and now white is in time to pick up a couple pawns. Queen takes a6, rook a8. If bishop takes f6, once again bishop d4 is a problem with similar position to the game. Rook a8 is the move played, and f7 check. Another little subtlety, doesn't make a big difference, but after queen takes b5, bishop takes f6, the king would feel a little more at home, even though he's far away from home, than after this intermediate move played by David Navara, the move f7, forcing king takes f7, and now queen takes b5. One point is that rook takes a2 is not a good idea because of queen b3 check. So once again, we should take stock and realize that white has two extra passed pawns and the black king is still weak. I'm not sure about the evaluation of this position. Giri mentioned it, technically winning, but not practically winning, something like that, which I think is fair. White might be winning with best play, but with the two rooks and the open files and the piece is quite active, there is always some counterplay here. And Giri starts by going rook a to d8, occupying this central file, trying to, orchestrate this counterplay. Queen b3 check was played, once again forcing the king to its favorite outpost on g6. Couple checks to make the time control, and here on move 40, as it often happens, the last move before the time control, Navara makes a mistake. He should have gone for the move h4, creating some space for his king on h2. When the computer grants him good winning chances, as I mentioned, I'm not that sure, especially in practice, if black can't manage to drum up enough counterplay, but h4 is certainly a good move also threatening to arrest the black king in many lines with h5 check. And Giri would have faced a very unpleasant defense. He probably has to go bishop f6 and let's say queen g3 check, king f7, queen f4. White keeps chipping away and putting pressure. Instead, Navara played a very tempting geometrical idea, the move bishop d6, hoping to block this rook, and if the rook takes on d6, White has queen g3 check, picking it up, so you can't take. What you can do, however, is you can take the pawn on b2, a little counter tactic. That's what Giri plays, and with one of these passed pawns disappearing, most of White's winning chances disappear as well. He could have played even more cunningly, according to the computer, by going bishop d4 check, king f1, and rook to e3, trying to activate his pieces. But that's a very tough thing to do on move 40. If you see, you can instead take a pawn. So bishop takes b2 was played, and queen takes b2, rook takes d6. In this position, without the bishops, I believe the rooks are strong enough to hold the balance. You can never queen and a pawn against two rooks. Therefore, this is pretty much a draw. Instead, maybe the last try to play for a win would have been something like bishop f4, but that's very inconsistent after you played bishop d6 and black took the pawn to now move this bishop again. And after bishop f6, dealing with only one passed pawn. Once again, I believe that black should hold. In the game, queen takes b2 was played, and after queen takes b2, rook d6, h3, rook to a6. No side can really hope to play for a win. Black can pick up the a2 pawn at will, but his king is so exposed that White will always have, at the very least, a perpetual and counterplay against it. Therefore, the players, after a tremendous fight, decided to agree a draw here on move, whatever it is, 42. I believe, yeah, this was a great fight. Not only great attacking play and great sense for the initiative by David Navara, starting with bishop c5, rook e8, and also this f5, especially his f5, ef, rook f5, gf, bishop h5. But also credit to Giri, if you're under such an attack, to keep your cool and find all the defensive moves. He might have been worse, but he was never obviously lost. He never gave away a clear win to Navara. You need a lot of skill, and Giri, I'm sure, is happy that he avoided disaster in this game and avoided starting with half out of 3. He's not going to be thrilled about his 1 out of 3, but both players still firmly in the tournament. And yeah, kudos to them for a very exciting game. Thank you guys for watching this video. Check out Chess24 for our live coverage. See you in the next one. Bye bye.